Welcome to Her Story, the podcast that brings to life the stories of incredible women throughout history. Each episode uncovers the remarkable lives, achievements, and struggles of women who shaped the world, beyond the textbooks and headlines. Join us as we celebrate their legacies and inspire new generations with tales of courage, resilience, and trailblazing spirit. In today's episode, I'll be talking to renowned author Elizabeth Fremantle about her brand new novel, Sinners, a new historical fiction novel about Beatrice Cenci. Elizabeth Fremantle is an award-winning author of historical fiction. Her novel, Disobedient, won the HWA Gold Crown 2024. Her first novel, Queen's Gambit, about Tudor Queen Catherine Parr, was adapted as the major motion picture Firebrand, starring Alicia Vikander and Jude Law. 3 further novels, Sisters of Treason, Watch the Lady, and The Girl in the Glass Tower, combine as a Tudor quartet. As E.C. Fremantle, she has written a pair of historical thrillers, The Poison Bed and The Honey and the Sting. Her contemporary short story, That Kind of Girl, was shortlisted for the prestigious Bridport Prize in 2021. Her most recent novel is Sinners, set in Rome in 1599, and it tells the tragic story of Beatrice Cenci. As a journalist, she has contributed to various publications including British Vogue, Paris Vogue, The Sunday Times, Vanity Fair, The Financial Times, The Wall Street Journal, and LUK. She currently lives in London. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm really excited for today. I've been talking about it for weeks with my friends that you're coming on the podcast.
Oh, well, I'm really pleased to be here, and I can't wait to get into talking about sinners.
Not that you need introducing, but could you tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Okay, well, I have for the last 14 or 15 years I've been earned my living as a writer, but before that, I had a kind of more complicated career path. I did I was expelled from school. I didn't finish my education. I didn't have proper qualifications. And though I loved books as a child, they were like my refuge, and had always wanted to be a novelist. I thought I'd blown it. And I had a job. I managed to have a career in fashion journalism. And but I still felt really frustrated. So there came a time when I had the opportunity to go back to university and get a qualification, and then I did a master's in creative writing. And then, of course, I thought, yeah, well, this is it. Now I can be a novelist. And it took me 10 years after that, and 3 unpublished novels that got rejected by everybody. I think that's a story a lot of novelists have a similar path. They have a lot of rejections, and then finally, that did happen for me after 10 years of trying. Um, and that was my book, Queen's Gambit, which has been republished as Firebrand because a film was made of the book that came out last year. And they had to change the title because of another very, very successful series called The Queen's Gambit. Yeah, so that was my kind of breakthrough book. And since then, I've just been writing more, always historical, always set in a similar period, early modern period, which is really the kind of, in England, it's the Tudor and Stuart period. And then my last 2 novels have been set in Italy at the same time, so late Renaissance, early Baroque. And the second one of those is my 8th novel, and it's called Sinners.
I mean, what a wonderful journey into writing. I mean, Firebrand is hugely popular. I mean, Me and my mum watch the film basically every other week. It's it's on all the time, and my mum's just finished the book, and she absolutely loves it.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. What I like, what I find really heartwarming is if my books touch women of all generations. I mean, men too, obviously, but mainly I'm kind of interested in women's responses to my work. Yeah, and it's lovely to know that a mother, a daughter, that they're both equally enjoying the same piece of writing. That means a lot to me.
I mean, my mum didn't know anything about Catherine Parr, and I was like, "Well, you need to read the book because the book goes so much more into Catherine's story." And she's like, "Oh, okay, I'll give it a go." She's like, "Oh my God, I love this book." Like,
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, I mean, she's an interesting figure, Catherine Parr, and really, I wanted to write that book about her because no one really knew. I think people kind of vaguely know that rhyme, don't they? Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. And it's like, so she's one of three Catherines. Which one? Oh, okay, she's the last one. Oh, so she's the one that survived. And they think sort of the dull nursemaid one. But actually, well, because you've read the book, you know the story. She survived a plot on her life. She was a kind of really, really active political operator and took enormous risks, personal risks, to forward her views. And she was the first woman to publish an original text in the English language. No one really knew that about her, and that's why I wanted to write the book because I thought her legacy is really important.
no, I completely agree. I think Catherine Parr is so underestimated, and I think for a first novel, it's great to start busting myths about a high-known Tudor woman, but that is just put under nursemaid, and that's it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yes, the dull one. Yeah, and she really wasn't. I feel obviously because she was my first published novel, I feel a great kind of attachment to her. If other people write about her, I feel like I have a prior claim.
Today, though, we're talking about your newest book, Sinners, which is all about Beatrice Cenci. Is it I say it? Cenci?
Cenci.
Cenci. What made you want to write about Beatrice? What kind of made you interested?
Okay, well, I had known about her story because she's a woman, so she's a noblewoman living at the very end of the 1500s in Rome. And her story is quite well known in Italy. And as I'm always constantly researching the kind of women that have remarkable lives, because those are the women I like to write about, women that people don't necessarily know so much about. So, for me, it's the younger sisters of Lady Jane Grey who had these extraordinary lives, but people haven't heard of them, or so those are the people that interest me. And I'd known about, I say Beatrice, which is the Italian, it's a bit pretentious, it's the Italian pronunciation. And actually in the novel, we call her Bea, so it makes it a little bit easier. Um, I'd sort of known about her. Her story is a very odd one. The Romantics had taken up her story in the 18th century. Shelley wrote a verse drama, which the critics didn't really think it was much good, and so people don't really know that much about it. It's certainly not as famous as most of his other work. And Dickens had written a little bit about her. Stendhal wrote a short story about her. There are lots of operas. I think there are something like three or four operas about her. I mean, she is that kind of figure. And so I did know of her and I thought, oh, she'd be quite a good one for me to write about. But, it was based in Italy. I'd never done a book set in Italy. I was kind of focused on England and a certain particular setting. And then I became obsessed with writing a novel about Artemisia Gentileschi, the Baroque painter who has an extraordinary life. She became one of the great painters of her day. And I mean, I again, because it was set in Italy, I thought, well, it's not really my territory. But I managed to persuade my editor to let me write that one. And that was Disobedient, which was my previous novel. And for those who've read Disobedient, the first chapter Beatrice Cenci makes a little cameo in the first chapter, and she's a sort of she's referred back to Artemisia, the protagonist. She kind of refers back to Beatrice Cenci quite often, and so she was really on my mind. And I was under contract to write another novel set in Elizabethan England, and I just couldn't stop thinking about doing a I kind of wanted to do another Italy set novel. I had all the research from the period, and it was all kind of fresh in my mind. And, my head was in Italy and particularly in Rome. And I thought I just really want to write this as a pair. So they are a kind of pair of novels that stand completely alone, but they also work together. It doesn't matter which order you read them in, really. I wrote them in the or wrong order, really, because the action of Sinners takes place before the action of Disobedient, but they are linked. They're thematically linked. And I just thought her story, I'm one, I'd never written a proper love story, and I really, really, really wanted to tackle that. And for me, that was the only way I could really access Beatrice's story was through this central love story. And I also, there's something about it's another story. Disobedient was a story with a big, important court case, and so is this. And I wanted to explore that a little bit further. So Sinners gave me the opportunity to do that.
How have you tried to depict her story? Obviously without giving away spoilers, obviously we want people to read this book.
Yeah.
How have you tried to depict that?
Well, I mean, I tend to tackle the darker subjects anyway. I'm very drawn to situations where the stakes are really high, where, you know, the situation, a woman's situation is one that forces her to take a certain kind of action. And so this is, in a way, typical of the kind of story I'm attracted to. I'm trying to skirt around because I don't want to give any spoilers away because it is very much, I've tried to write it as very much a kind of page turner. So I don't want people to sort of feel like they know what's going to happen. Um, but so Beatrice, she's growing up, she's a young noblewoman and she's growing up in a family with the patriarch, her father, Francesco Cenci. He's a monster and a real tyrant. He is in kind of vendettas with a number of other noble families. There are fights where the young men of the families fight to the death, and the novel opens really. This is not really a spoiler because it happens on kind of around page 5 with the death of Beatrice's brother, which is devastating. And so Francesco decides to take his family. So that's Beatrice's stepmother, her younger brother, and her out of Rome and into a kind of safe house. He describes it as for their own safety, but it's basically a prison. They get there, it's so remote. It's perched on the edge of an enormous precipice. It's an ancient fortified castle. And this is all based on a true story. I mean, I've slightly manipulated the timeline of it. They were incarcerated in this place a lot longer than in my novel. I've kind of condensed the narrative a bit. But he basically incarcerates them there. And ostensibly the threat is outside from these other families they're in vendetta with, but we slowly come to realize that the threat is really inside and it's coming from him. And so that creates a lot of tension, writing a story like that. And then it comes to a point where we understand there's only one way out for Beatrice. She must get out for various reasons, and that there's only one way out. So, we're propelled into this situation, and about which she really has no choice.
How have you tried to depict Beatrice in this, with, of course, so she's the main protagonist in this book?
Um, well, she's an interesting character because she's not really a conventional heroine. She's unlike most women of that period, and I kind of have a foil to her in a young character called Ilaria, who is kind of brought in. She's very, very young. She's brought in as a companion to Beatrice, and she is also incarcerated with the family. And Ilaria is very much more conventional. She wants to be a nun. We have, the overarching sense of Catholicism and all its restrictions, particularly on the female and the female body. But Beatrice has this desire for freedom, so much more than a typical woman of that period. She wants to be free of the kind of the claustrophobic reign of her father, and we can understand why she isn't typical because of what her father's like. Um, and she's always kind of trying to escape in her head, in her body. She begins a relationship with a man. I mean, it's incredibly dangerous because should her father find out, I mean, it, heaven knows what might happen to both of them. Um, so she's bold, but a little bit reckless. And that was important for me because all the decisions she makes are, increasingly as the novel goes on, they're increasingly kind of reckless, but in some ways forthright. I wanted everyone to really be able to understand why she made the choices she made.
No, yeah, I agree. I think Beatrice really, you can see the desperation through the novel, how desperate she becomes, especially because
Mm,
of her father and who he's like. And I think they are stuck there, aren't they? The whole family is
yeah,
they don't
yeah,
know what to do.
yeah. But then also, she is her father's daughter. She's got that a streak of ruthlessness in her character, which is the thing that kind of enables her in a way. Yeah, I wanted, so I mean, he's an unremittingly wicked character. And I don't normally write wicked characters that don't have any redeeming features, but the more and more I researched into the story, I just couldn't find a sense of what it was that made him the way he was. He really, really is. I tried to give him some backstory, and it's a little thin. You always want there to be some kind of at least a reason why someone becomes a monster. And, I do give a little sense of that, but, he's so bad. He does such terrible things that I think he doesn't really need. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel I needed to make him very any sympathetic in any way at all, I think is what I'm trying to say.
No, I agree. I think you can just get the vibe that he's just nasty for no reason. It's just he likes being mean.
Yeah, he's almost psychopathic in his wickedness. And researching him, and he's definitely, everyone who's written about him, there's nobody who says, well, but you have to see it like this about him. He's always regarded as but I didn't want him to be sort of two-dimensional either. I think it's it's fun writing the bad people because it's they're much easier to write than good people. Because it's something kind of thrilling about the bad people. But with him, he was so unremittingly bad that he wasn't even fun to write. Whereas Beatrice, she's not all good. And so I really felt that, there was something really to hold on to about her story. And I think She was, historically, she was this figure who she produced a great kind of public outcry in her favor. So when there was a court case around her and her family, the whole of Rome kind of rose up and, in favor of her. And so it made me think that she must have had some kind of extraordinary charisma. And I think that there's something quite compelling about that element of her story. But not her father. Nobody thought her father had any saving graces at all.
No, I think it's quite telling, obviously, when we get to the court case, that people are so more agreeable to Beatrice because they know what her father is like, and
Yeah,
they're like, yeah, why don't we feel sorry for him? We've met him, you know.
yeah, yeah. Yes, well, exactly. And I think also in historically speaking, his reputation went before him. He'd done terrible things to so many people that I think everyone wanted to see him get his comeuppance.
How have you tried to interweave the truth of the story and blend it into historical fiction?
Well, that's a really interesting question because mostly the people I write about, so for example, Catherine Parr, we know so much about her story, and always with the historical record, you always, as a writer of fiction, you have to be able to read between the lines because all history is written from a particular perspective. And I always read everything I can find and try and get back to original archives of that particular character. But with this story, it was really interesting. The more I read and the deeper I dug, the more the story kind of fell apart in my hands. It was really, really hard to get to a sense of what really happened. Just after the action of the novel, it ends in 1599, and then after that, a whole kind of mythology became attached to Beatrice's story, and it all became attached to this particular image. Actually, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's this, which is a painting that if you Google her, that is the image that comes up. And that was thought to be a painting by a painter called Guido Reni. Um, and it hung in a collection labeled as Beatrice Cenci for years and years. For 150 years, we've known that that is not a picture of her, and it's not by Guido Reni. But still, if you Google her, that's the image that comes up. There's some sort of insistence that that's her. And there are certain other elements of her story that one, that she was, at the time of the court case, that she was 17. Well, a birth certificate emerged not that long ago. And she wasn't 17, she was 22. So, and this picture was not her. And then this sort of mythology around her, people wrote all these tracts telling her story. And I've read a few of them and they all differ slightly. And that they're all a little bit true, but none of them tell the complete truth. It's really, really impossible. You scratch and you arrive at nothing because everything seems, each story is slightly different. So I found some court testimonies, fortunately had been translated. And I thought, okay, well, now this is something definite about her story. And they were really interesting and revealing and told me a lot of things. And then I learned that they were all taken under torture. So they're all unreliable, which in some ways, I thought at that point, I thought, oh God, I'm going to have to give up. I don't know how to access this story or, how to write it. And then I I think I made the decision that that kind of absence of firm fact freed me up to write I mean, it is fiction and it does, there's so little, what we really do know, I've tried to stick to. As I said, I slightly condensed the time the plot covers. And I've got a number of completely fictional characters, but all the main characters are there, and the things that happen to them, by and large, happen to them. And particularly the court case, we know quite a lot about the court case. So it's large, I mean, it is fiction, and she is a fictional creation. We have no idea what she was like. And that was the kind of thing that fascinated me. So it is fiction, but it addresses a real story about which we know very, very little. A story, it for me was more like those, those mythological retellings. For me, her story has been mythologized, and so I'm retelling it. Um, and it's a story that's kind of lost. It's a lost story. So it's largely fictional, but it's based in truth. Does that make sense? I mean, I know it sounds like I'm like I'm being a bit equivocating about it, but that's the closest I can say. And I try and be, I've written a kind of quite a fulsome author's note in the back to show where I've been, really kind of moved away from the record and where I've stuck to it. So I think that that's probably helpful for readers because I don't, I think no author of historical fiction seeks to mislead people, but sometimes, story has a certain momentum and story structure dictates that or I suppose you focus on a certain area of the story. So the love story, it's very loosely referred to in some of the testimonies, and but it's very, it's almost written in invisible ink in the record. But for me, that needed to be the focus for her development as a character. So that's the bit of the story I really bring out.
But when writing the book, did you actually have a favorite character, well, person that you were writing about? Obviously, Beatrice is the main character, but did you enjoy writing someone else more?
Um, I mean, I did love writing Olympio. I think he was a really interesting character because, well, partly because we know so little about him. And so that kind of, I had kind of free rein to create him as I wanted. But yeah, I always quite enjoy writing male characters as well. And yeah, and I think he's incredibly sympathetic. I mean, he's a genuinely good-hearted person. And yeah, he's a favorite.
What have you enjoyed the most about writing this book and showing it to the world?
Oh gosh, well, every book, it's the same. It's a kind of process of pain and pleasure. It's terrifying when a book goes out into the world because you never know how people are going to react to it. But I think the thing I've enjoyed most is the readers' responses. People have, because I thought it's so unremittingly tragic, this story. It's dark, terrible things happen, sex and violence is for, it's really, I don't really shy away from that. Um, but so I wondered how people would receive it, and I think the thing that's really given me the greatest pleasure is I've had such incredible responses. People they've really engaged with it and enjoyed it. I was worried that people would hate it because it's dark. But I think dark stories have a place. I think they help us understand about survival and understand about the human spirit and yeah. So that's been really heartwarming for me.
Now, I think this story, I don't think there could be much light-hearted you can get about it. I think it'd be very hard to make it all rainbows and
Yes, it wouldn't be a musical, would it? Oh, I don't know. They do get quite dark musicals these days. Yeah, I don't see it getting the Andrew Lloyd Webber treatment anytime soon.
I think it was refreshing though to kind of have a character that was heartwarming but also flawed, as you said, she is like her father in some ways. I think it was interesting to learn how complicated she is while also still being sympathetic to her.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I think that's one of the things I really like to do as a writer because nobody, anybody who's all good, they're not, I don't see them as interesting characters. I think that kind of balance of light and dark, in a way, that's what makes a character interesting and interesting for me to write.
What would you like people to love and learn from this book once they've read it?
Okay, well, I think I just alluded to it. It's about, the resilience of the human spirit. And also I feel like I want to raise that kind of central question about morality, about, good and evil, and what is she? Is she innocent or guilty? Is she saint or sinner? You know, what is she? And aren't we all a little bit of all those things? That, so I think I wanted to kind of raise a question and have people wondering about the morality of what happens and what actions she takes in the book. So that was that for me. I hope that there's a conversation that goes on, that continues after the pages are shut.
Towards the end of the podcast, I like to ask my guests five fun history questions. So, firstly, have you got a history pet peeve?
I really have, Jess. And it's mainly not so much in novels, but in historical dramas that recently there's been a tendency for writers to use, it's particularly the F word. Every character says it all the time. And listen, I don't shy away from a well-placed curse or swear word if it's appropriate, and if it's appropriate to the character who's using it. But it's just liberally sprayed through some of these dramas. And for me, it takes me out of the action. I just think that person wouldn't be saying that. That's, it's not, it doesn't have the impact it should. A word like that should have an impact, and it doesn't if it's too used too often. So that's my pet peeve.
No, I think that's a good one because I think it, as you say, it's very liberal now. The swearing is in most TV programs. Like sometimes it just isn't needed to get the point
Yeah,
across.
yeah, yeah. And I think, obviously in the modern world, people swear a lot, but not everybody. Certain people will swear, they'll use the F word in every other sentence. That's their voice. And I think that's the thing about, creating any plausible character in a drama or a novel, is you have to find their voice. And if everybody's speaking using the same swear words, then you're not differentiating between the voices. And yeah, I think it's lazy writing. And I do know, we all have to be a bit anachronistic using, particularly with swear words. I mean, all language is anachronistic. If I couldn't possibly be writing in, a language that's appropriate to the sort of late 16th century Italy, no one would understand it. Most of all me. Um, but you can use a swear word that's more commonly used nowadays, but it has to feel appropriate for the time as well. I understand if I used the word zoons, it would be ridiculous. It would sound, it just, it would make it sound like pastiche. It would sound a bit silly. And, so there are more modern equivalents. But I just think too liberally used, it spoils it for me.
You could go back in time to any event or day in history. When would it be and why?
Okay, you know what? I would not go back in time if I was paid £1 million. I think there's no better time than now. And because I'm too much of a pragmatist, I think, well, if I went back in time, I'd probably catch smallpox because I wouldn't have the immunity. It'd be, it would be too strange an experience. So I don't want to go back in time. I'm afraid that's my answer.
Do you know what? Fair enough, because if I was actually logistic, I'd be so scared of catching an illness.
Yeah, yeah. And imagine, also being a woman, you go back in time, there's no better time to be a woman than now. Unless you're in certain parts of the world, like Afghanistan, where it was definitely better 40 years ago for women. It was definitely better 5 years ago for women. But, so as a woman, I think, and, my books do speak to that. So, yes, I'm afraid I'm not going back. You can't make me.
Have you got a favorite book? It can be fiction, non-fiction, or both.
Oh gosh, when you told me you were going to ask me this question, I really, it's really, really hard. It's like asking me to pick between my children. But the one book that I return to, I read this almost every year, is The Talented Mr. Ripley. I'm a huge Patricia Highsmith fan. And that book for me, her characterization is just absolutely masterful. She creates this extraordinary character in Tom Ripley. And for those who haven't read it, read it. I'm not going to give anything away, but what she does is she makes you, despite knowing that Ripley is really, well, he's not the nicest of characters, let's just put it like that. But you really get behind him. And that to me is genius writing. It's so difficult to do that. And she somehow does it. And all the twists and turns of plot she manages so beautifully. Yeah, I think that's got to be the one.
If you could invite any historical figure to a dinner party, who would it be and why?
Oh, well, without a doubt, Artemisia Gentileschi, who I was talking about before, she's the protagonist of Disobedient, my novel before last. She was a young woman, incredibly talented at a time. I mean, my book is set in 1611, in a time where some women painted, but they painted portraits, they did, acceptable topics. Artemisia, she painted the most controversial subjects. Her very famous painting is Judith slaying Holofernes. It's a biblical scene, but it's two women hacking the heads off a man. It's right in that moment. There's blood spurting everywhere. It's such a controversial subject for a woman to paint. And she was very young as well when she painted that. I think she had so much courage. And then she goes on in her later life. She just lives life as she wanted to. And I really admire that in a woman of that period, particularly. She lived a kind of almost like a libertine lifestyle. She was married to a man and she had a long affair with another man that her husband seemed to, I mean, there are letters and things, he seems to have sanctioned that, so I feel like they had some kind of arrangement. It all feels very modern. I think she's extraordinary. Yes, I'd definitely invite her to my dinner party.
And now I think she's great. I mean, I've read Disobedient and I was like, go, good, go get it, girl, go
Yeah.
live it.
Yeah, yeah, there's something very modern about her spirit, I think. I think that's why she sort of captured the public imagination at this moment in time as well.
And finally, have you got a favourite historical fact?
Well, I've got a fun historical fact. I don't necessarily know if it's my favorite because there are so many, and in everything I research, I always find another incredible nugget. But the fact that in, in Elizabethan England, black teeth were a status symbol because sugar was so expensive. which just seems so absurd given now everyone's rushing off to Turkey to get like zinging white teeth. Yeah, so that's my fun fact anyway.
I know it is wild though, isn't it? Like you got black
Yeah,
teeth, you're rich. You
yeah, yeah. Something to aspire to. Mm.
Thank you so much for taking the time today to come onto my podcast and discuss this wonderful new book.
That's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Her Story. If there's a historical woman who inspires you and you'd like to share her story on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch at unholytudor@gmail.com. Until next time, keep celebrating the incredible women who've shaped our world.